very good afternoon to you all. I think that Anthony's given us a title here, which is a typical Anthony title. It's one of those ones which is going to have to allow us to be inventive, but maybe we won't be totally creative as he would like us to be. But the title, if I can remind us, is actually Strategic Autonomy and Global Interdependence. And where next for Europe in foresight? I think that I'll just be as simple as possible as the chairman, and I'll hand it in the order to those people who Anthony has just introduced. So first to Maroš, then to Klaus, then to Jim, and then to Stefano. But I'd ask you just to be able to put a panorama on this particular subject, which is very much the core of the discussions that we've had in the last 36 hours, but also, if you can, where it says we're next in foresight, I think it would be good to be productive in this session so as to think what might be the top 3 priorities for the next 12 months ahead in the areas of policy which you see are the most important. And as a footnote, having just chaired Bob Zelig, he always used to say to me, if you've got more than 3 priorities, you don't have any priorities. So as a kind of lesson in discipline, then that is, I think, just a kind of pointer for our discussion this afternoon. So, Maroš, if I could turn to you first, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us because you're, after all, the man right at the center of foresight today in Europe, and to have your reflections will be of a key importance. Maroš.
Thank you very much, James. I hope you can hear me well. It works perfect. First, James, it's a pleasure to see you. We, of course, would prefer the personal contact, but we have to do it in this virtual way. But if you allow me, even to be very much to the point, I really would like to start with what Anthony thought is not possible. I still want to applaud the European Parliament. I would like to applaud especially Anthony for excellent moderator for throughout the day. Really to thank all the team he just named, because I know how difficult it is to organize such events, and everything went super smoothly, and it was a great achievement. And also I have to appreciate the personal contribution of Klaus, Welle, who is I would say enormous asset for the European foresight, and was always, I would say, such an engine behind this good and great institutional cooperation we have on foresight and many other issues. And I think that without this very important contribution of the European Parliament, especially in this conference, it would be not of the quality as we have seen over the last 2 days. And I also try to be very responsive to the 3 priorities and to what to do next, because I think that what would be, I think, very important to be very practical is to consolidate that support we have felt over the last few years, and I would say especially over the last 2 days. Yesterday we launched the Strategic Foresight Network, and the fact that we have a Prime Minister of Spain, the Federal Minister of Germany, future presidency represented by the Europe Minister and Minister of Austria. It just really shows that there is strong interest and potential also in our member states who would like us to kind of share the good thoughts, the foresight, the ideas on really using foresight for better policy making, for better lawmaking. So I think we just have to do our utmost and jointly approach our member states on the governmental level, but also on the level of academia, think tanks, and really mobilize that positive momentum which was created for using that wealth of knowledge for better foresight. And I think we should not stop there, because I was just listening with a great interest to Bob Zelig, and I was with him at different panels and brainstorming groups. He's always impressive, and as were many speakers which you invited, who attended, and I think really enriched our knowledge and the look into the foresight. So to work more closely with the OECD. Secretary General yesterday was very clear how important it is, and I know that how many bilateral studies we are actually completing every year, and I think that it would be very good use if we can get them from the desks of the experts and bring them more to the political assessment, political consumption, and make them more relevant for, I would say, the policy and decision making on the European level. The same goes for the World Economic Forum, different Atlantic partners. So I think it would be very important for us to use the interest in foresight in Europe, I would say worldwide, and to find the best, the most efficient way how he can harness that information, but also processes inside and filter out the topics, the themes which are the most relevant for our work. And then I think ESPAS can play a very crucial role how to bring the most important pieces of foresight and information to the political attention of the leaderships in all our institutions. Second point about the three priorities for the next year. So this was, I would say, the organizational one. But I think if it comes to the topic, I think that we kind of selected a good topic for the next annual strategic foresight report, because we would like to cover with really as good foresight as we can get the open strategic autonomy, what it means for us, how important it is. And I think there is a direct consequence of our report on resilience, because we discovered that we need to be more resilient. It's becoming, I would say, such a third pillar of our policies in the European Commission that next to the green and digital transition, we also have to make sure that the European Union as such is more resilient. And I think more resilience also means that we have to be more autonomous in our action, in political field, in economic field, in technological field, but also in, for example, monetary or financial field. And I think this is, I would say, the remit which we want to cover. And of course, any contribution from our ESPAS colleagues, but also from this wider community which we are now forming, I think would be very, very important. We do not want to be just autonomous. We want to work on open strategic autonomy, meaning to look for the best balance between being more autonomous and have that ability to act, but at the same time, of course, to be and continue to be the major champion for free and fair trade and really multilateralism and all that aspects which been always, I would say, the key aspects and features of the European foreign policy. The last point I would mention that this round would be what should be, let's say, the third priority. And here I think we have again to use to the best of our abilities the enormous potential which I see on horizon scanning. We somehow are always surprised by the major crises we have in Europe, and very often they've been on the horizon. We heard about them, but we've been not able somehow to bring them to the political attention. And therefore, I think that the topics which we should focus should be really the issue which was covered also by the participants: social media, artificial intelligence, and they impact on democracies. And we see that this is very difficult and very important topic for the future. Then what would be the future of jobs in this transforming economy? And I think that there will be a lot of debates linked with foreign relations, EU-US relations, rise of China. So I think this would be the topics on the horizon, and I'm sure that also the events will bring many more. But I think to cover them well, to have established network to process them would be very important one. And thank you very much for giving me the floor. And once again, congratulations to excellent organization and great participation in this conference.
Maroš, thank you very much indeed for that superb, very clear kind of enumeration under 3 points. I couldn't have done it any more effectively. So that was beautifully clear. So others will have to follow your example. So Klaus, over to you, please. What would be your reflections?
Thank you very much, James, and let me also first thank Maroš for his very kind words and also the excellent cooperation we established over the time. I believe that now 10 years in with the ESPAS process, we have reached a certain level of maturity. Maturity in relations, maturity in organization, and I think this conference is an example of this, but also a much heightened trust between the institutions. So for me, the question is, how can now, after 10 years, foresight maybe better inform the political process? So not a foresight operation separate from the political process, but how can it inform better the political process? And here we have a huge opportunity because we are starting now this year, still very modestly, but we are starting a multi-annual programming among the institutions. The Commission here has made proposals, and that will be an annual process, so it can be better and better and become better and better. And I would believe that the foresight operation should be very closely linked into the multi-annual programming exercise and inform that exercise. And therefore, we are also hoping that the model we have elaborated, and I had the honor to present, of assessing the risks, especially those which are generalized and very likely to occur, assessing our capabilities in the system, not only those on the European level, but also in the member states and intergovernmental cooperation, so from a non-ideological point of view, and then find out about the gaps which we are having. If we are doing that, it will be pretty easy to identify which gaps need to be addressed and which gaps need to be filled. And there we have a very close linkage, content-wise, between that operation and what could be the content of a multi-annual programming exercise that could inform itself by what Maroš called this horizon scanning exercise. And I believe also the knowledge which we have around the table also today with Jim and Stefano helps us also in a different regard. I mean, I think one thing which is really urgent now is to understand better what the new US administration and President Biden will mean for this relationship, and also for the debate on strategic autonomy. What do we really have to create separately and what can still be done together? And I believe that we are all expecting that what can still be done together is growing and might be growing even quite impressively with the new US administration. But I think that has to be found out and tested very, very quickly. And third, and there's also where Stefano comes into play and the External Action Service, we are not living in isolation, understanding and cooperating better with India, understanding and cooperating better with Japan. And also, as Bob Zulik has just explained, China is also not black and white. There is a huge cooperation agenda as well, and there's a successful experience with China. And even though, let's say, there are new issues being raised by Chinese policies, that shouldn't be forgotten. So if you want three, I would say, how can we make foresight more operational by linking it to the multi-annual programming exercise of the Union, spearheaded by the European Commission? Secondly, next year, understanding very quickly what does the new Biden administration mean also for ourselves. And thirdly, develop a much better knowledge, but also contacts and linkages into India, into Japan, and into China.
Yes, once again, many thanks indeed. Difficult to be able to say that it was any better, but it was superb, the same as Maroš, because there you were with three very clear pointers of the way in which we can bring the next steps forward, as you say, building on what we've already done in the past. And to me, as you've been the epitome of it, to me, is this is an interinstitutional process where by working together we all benefit. So thank you very much, Klaus, for your initial thoughts. But I'm sure you'll come back into the debate a little bit later on, if you would, please. Jim, could I come to you, please, next? Someone who has been also really on the long road march from when we started this off nearly 10 years ago. So it's so nice to see that very much that you're present, and congratulations on your chairmanship of your interview at lunchtime with Madeleine Albright and the other US debate that we had today. Jim, please.
Thanks very much, James. Very pleased to be here. You make me feel a bit old, but there we are. I have, first of all, my first remark is a great conference. I really enjoyed it. I thought very high quality, and I can only associate myself to the congratulations, particularly to the European Parliament, but also to Maroš and his team. If I may say so, this is something you've heard before, and we've said it. The only thing I would say is that it was a bit conventional. How many Trump voters were there? Very Western. But I think this time this was not a real problem because of the importance of the transatlantic debate and what is happening in the United States. But my point I want to make is we should really together think about we need more disruption, more variety, and more contradiction. But it's not a criticism at all. I think the conference itself was of very high quality, and I listened quite a lot of it. My second point is very interesting title. I think it must have been Anthony who invented this. It gives already a clue as to what strategic autonomy is not. It's not the end of globalism, and it's not the end of interdependence. It's not autarky, and it's not protectionism. As usual, of course, in Europe, we have 25 different ways of reading it. That is why I asked the question, what is it? I try to define it in a very simple term. It's the ability to set our own priorities, make sovereign decisions, defend our core interests and values. Now, this arose in the security context. And that is why I suppose I mentioned this. I asked a question about this to Mr. McAllister, whether he favors the AKK interpretation of German defense minister or the Macron one. And he sort of was leaning towards AKK, but actually I think her interpretation is one which is linked to strategic autonomy, particularly in the security area. For me, it is much broader, and it covers climate change, digital trade, and many other things. And so for that reason, I think maybe we're not that far apart, because I cannot believe that European leaders would not support greater autonomy for the Europeans. And then, of course, we have, it got a lot of traction after 2016 because of the election of Trump, because of Brexit, and of course, because of the COVID crisis. Here is a real issue where we have to adapt and where we have to modernize our approach, and hence the debate about where we are going in terms of foresight is extremely important. I would also remind you in this context, there is an interesting book by someone called Taleb, which is called Anti-Fragile. It is about how to ensure resilience so as to withstand black swans, but actually it is also about how to exploit black swans, because even the COVID crisis is also an opportunity for us, however strange that may sound. Now, there is a clear link to foresight. It is obvious because foresight allows us to better understand the possible future and hence to prepare it. The first thing to do, in my view, is a better definition of strategic agenda and a thought on the methodology and the measurement of it. The second thing is very important, I think, for the European Union, is to look against this background at weaknesses and strengths of the European Union. Not forget our strengths, because that's what we normally do, because we have quite a potential. The third point is, in this context, maybe to look a bit more again at the issue of governance and state power, because you see in a crisis like COVID, how the state, or in the subprime crisis, how the state is becoming, again, very important. And it would be good to think in the longer term on areas where we need maybe more state, and areas where the state should stay outside and we should leave things more to private enterprise. And then there is one element which I'd also think we should start doing, is a kind of comparative analysis, European potential and weaknesses versus American potential and weaknesses, and Chinese potential and weaknesses, because it's not as though the Chinese don't have any weaknesses, they do. I would like to conclude with a word on ESPAS, and again, thanking James for having launched this funny thing. a long time ago. I agree with Maroš and Klaus that it requires developing. I would simply say we have to be slightly careful. I think ESPAS should remain focused on longer term foresight, not about planning. That's a different issue. I agree with those who say that we strengthen the link to policy. Absolutely important. And I think what Maroš is doing in terms of outreach is very important, and Klaus is always making the same point. At the same time, I would really plead to keep a very informal nature of our cooperation. We need the freedom to think in an environment where we pool intelligence and imagination rather than institutional thinking and views, and look at the longer term. So I see foresight in ESPAS as a place where ideas and knowledge and imagination reign that can then feed into the work of the various institutions and lead, of course, to policy changes, not the other way around. From the Council side, we are ready to take our part in this. In fact, the decision by our Secretary General to create a unit of foresight isn't a new decision. It owes a lot to ESPAS and the ESPAS spirit. This unit under Guy Milton's able leadership would not have happened without ESPAS. Isn't that a nice compliment? That I link an administrative decision to the work we've been doing on substance over the last 10 years. Thank you.
Well, Jim, thank you very much indeed for that. You've always been known for your savoir-faire to say things directly, so we all understand where your heart is. It's on your sleeve. But I think you're right, and I had wanted to underline that, as you have raised, and we can maybe discuss it amongst ourselves, is actually the nature of ESPAS as we move forward. It's not intended to be there dealing with day-to-day problems. It's looking at longer term, which is why we've established 2030, and then hopefully by 2024 we do one for 2035, because we have the strength in the network to be able to look long term and find out what the priorities are. And you always said, and this is why I wanted to come in at this stage before bringing in Stefano, is that it's not actually the object you're getting to, it's the change in the trends which are underway, which is a really valuable thing to policymakers. For example, 10 years ago, who knew about mobile phones, but nowadays they're ubiquitous. 10 years before that, it was the environment. Who knew about that? Then it's suddenly by 2010 meters. ESPAS is there to be able to be a free-thinking, independent system to get the best kind of information available from everywhere and then feed it into the other networks, which, like the academics and other ones, then feed off the kind of principles. So thank you very much for defending the ancien principles of the ESPAS process. Stefano, please, if you'd like to come in, please, and give us your views of where we should be going next.
Thank you very much, James. Well, I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage to speak at the end of a series of very brilliant presentations. Okay, let me offer my 3 points. First of all, I think we are all speaking and saying the same thing about the open strategic autonomy and the importance of the open strategic autonomy. I don't know, I'm not attached too much to the label, because sometimes the label is generating reactions or negative reactions. I'm more attached to substance. If you look back at the end of the day, we have done already a very important number of things which have made us more autonomous strategically. The creation of the euro was certainly one of those, or the Galileo was another choice to be autonomous strategically, and many more from that point of view. So I think that somehow what we need to do is to build on what we have already done, to define our interests, to define the values that we want to promote, and to work on this. What do I mean, work on this? We need to identify which are the vulnerabilities that we still have, and which are the missing links, and the things that we need to do in order to make it sure that we are able to, again, promote our interests, defend our values, and become more resilient in case of crisis. From that point of view, I think that the work that you are doing in terms of identifying missing elements, the pyramids that I have seen in your reports. It's very interesting because it's the small cases at the end they fix what has already been there, what should be strengthened, and what is lacking. So from this point of view, the operationalization of making ESPAS more operational that Klaus was referring to, it's almost already there. The methodology is there. We need to make sure that it goes in the direction that we want to follow. Second point, we need to look at our toolbox and to understand how to use it. I think that from a certain point of view, we are not that placed. We have already a number of instruments. Jim was saying it before. Sometimes we define ourselves, we think of ourselves that we are less able or less powerful of what we really are. I think that at the end of the day, there are a number of things that we have already in our toolbox, including capabilities. But the point is that the willingness to use it, and that's something that we should reflect upon. I mean, it's I remember years ago, when we started in working in COPS called Security Policy Cooperation, working about battle groups. And we had battle groups, but we have never used them. So the point is not only the toolbox, but also the willingness to use it and the determination to use it. Third point concerning the coherence of our action. It would be good to look at and how we are still working in silos. We are still much more concerned about prerogatives and less about output. And honestly, this is what is creating a lot of problems to the European Union and to the ability to have an impact on real life. And I think that could be an interesting third thing that we could do together. And since the others have already spoken about what to do with ESPAS, I can spare saying that it was very good to maintain the annual ESPAS conference, to have regular meetings among ESPAS members discussing on specific topics and so on. This is something that has already been covered before me. Thank you very much, James.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Stefano. Yes, it's not always the easiest to come last, but you acquitted yourself perfectly with the three priorities, which fitted in to the broader message of the other three who've already spoken. So I think in the remaining moments that we have of this panel and debate, Maroš, if you are still there, I would like to turn to you because I think that in the points which you raised on the organizational side of things, that is, I think, a rather large umbrella which the other three speakers have added into your part on organizational stuff, how one makes this more effective and linking it into the political process. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think that's of something which one can see clearly. The point I'd like to ask you, and then do please come back on other things you'd like to react on that others have said, is on this question of an open strategic autonomy to be a subject which is central to the next foresight report. And I'd like to ask you, because you referred to Bob Zoellick, and he came up with a huge agenda there, which is a pretty common agenda of the main subjects that we're dealing with in Europe on climate change, on pandemic recovery, or on data, or on China. How do you see that fitting into this open strategic? Would Klaus's point, for example, be acceptable to you that you would actually include also in this thing so we might share some of these tasks together so we don't necessarily have to be autonomous in everything?
Thank you very much, James. And I also would like to thank all of the panelists and actually good friends for this excellent discussion. The first about the organizational issues. I'm very obliged to, the advice I was getting when I got to this new job, and I still remember that dinner where I think all of you attended at that time, and you've been bringing to the table all the experience which was gathered by ESPAS over the last years. And of course, one of the recommendations which was repeated by all speakers this evening, and this is how to make the ESPAS and foresight more politically relevant. And I see this as my task as a first vice president who is in charge of foresight, that we need to optimize the way how we can bring this information, that analysis, that suggestions or warning to the political level. How we are going to do it? So there are several tracks. The main tracks, and I'm very glad, very much supported by our President Ursula von der Leyen, is that at the beginning of the political cycle, we are going to present on an annual basis the strategic foresight report, where we would bring the ideas, where we would test them, when we would see what kind of, I would say, political buzz they create, so we can process it in the institution, and in this way to inform the State of the Union speech of the President, which of course has a programmatic character. As we all know, it's usually the first major political event in the autumn after summer break, and then I would say it comes back to me, because then we have to translate her political vision into the concrete Commission work program. So this is how we, I would say, establish the political cycle, and I very much like the idea of Klaus of linking it to then the joint declaration and multi-annual declaration, which would have more strategic character, and which are actually bringing all institutions together, and to keep it, I would say, on the level of the president of the institution, which give it to the strategic character, and I would say also more of a political vision type of the document, which I think is very, very important for our work. So that's a big strength. Then we are also introducing, I would say, the new element, which is that we are coming with such a foresight pieces of advice, of analysis, of contributions into all major initiatives which are coming to the Commission's table. I mean, the example, next week we are going to adopt a new pharmaceutical strategy, so we will have what we call the foresight newsletter. I mean, the facts and figures in interesting developments which would, I would say, affect the health policy in the European Union, and put it into the international context. So these are usually the short documents, because I really want my colleague commissioners to read it. So it cannot be long. I think it has to be sharp, it should be to the point, and it should be also the figures which bring into the context the proposal which we are making vis-a-vis, I would say, overall situation, and it has a few interesting figures through which we can prove the point. I mean, how did it come? I would say to the materialization was actually the first request I got as a foresight vice president from Ursula von der Leyen when we've been presenting the Green Deal strategy, and she was telling me, but I think it would be very important to have a good figures of what would be the cost of non-action, because we are all debating how much would it cost, how much investment is in, but let's try to find the figure, to figure out how much would it cost if you would not act. And that puts it into, of course, totally different perspective. And that was actually the first very quick foresight we developed thanks to the JRC and DG Klima, and equipped the president with the good figures for the argument. And this we want to do on the regular basis. I mean, we are also bringing this new culture of foresight into the Commission itself. So we set up such a network of foresight correspondents. So each DG has somebody who would be responsible, who would be responsible for foresight, and we want to really use the contributions for processing this information and making it more digestible, because we of course are getting a lot of information, and what I think is the most difficult task is how to make this information politically relevant. And not to be very long on your second question, I think that the definition which was presented by Jim and of strategic autonomy, and also the approach so well developed by Bob Zelig, I think is exactly the clear one. I think the Klaus's point on making the analysis, and I think we will see it relatively soon, where we would be able to reestablish the traditional transatlantic bond, and where there will be an expectation that we would be more autonomous, will become very clear. My expectations, honestly, is that we would get a lot of respect in the United States of America if we would be a little bit more able to take better care for our neighborhood, to be more involved to the east, to the south of our borders, and really to use not only the traditional economic influence which we have, our strong power in development aid, also in I would say more stabilizing set of policies which would be able to execute. And I think with China, that fact of systemic rivalry, I think is very well described. There is a lot of areas where we would cooperate, like the climate change. There is a lot of areas where we would like to cooperate, but we need also reciprocal, I would say, forthcoming attitude from China. Here I'm talking about market access, technological cooperation, standards, and so on. And so forth, but there will be also a lot of areas where we would compete. I would say here also the issue of how our states are run, what we think about the democracy would be, what are the most important value for us, how we see multilateralism, because very often we use the same words with a little bit different understanding behind it. So these would be all very important questions. So I think that we Europeans should really explore all possibilities where we can cooperate, but at the same time, we should also be very clear that we want to be able to stand on our own feet and to have the possibility to engage in autonomous action when needed. So that would be my answer to your 2 points. And thank you very much, James, for excellent chairmanship and that great idea that ESPAS actually became very vital body, as you can see.
So kind. Thank you, Maroš, very much indeed. That's very, I appreciate that very much indeed. I'd like to turn, Klaus, if I might, to you, because in terms of some of the things which Maroš was saying in answer to some of your thinking, I'd like to ask you particularly how you might see this US-EU partnership, because you do spend quite a bit of time thinking about that, where we know in the US Congress there are a lot of people who would like to cooperate with those in the European Parliament. Now we'll have administration working with the European Commission. It would seem to me that there could be room for some innovative ideas here. What do you think about it?
James,
this is to Klaus I was speaking.
Going back to where we were 4 years ago, I think to a certain extent we will meet people who are much more motivated than maybe they were 4 years ago. And that was my experience when we visited, for example, with President Tajani, Nancy Pelosi. There is, after the experience of the last 4 years, an enormous willingness on the other side to cooperate and to prove that multilateralism in fact does work. But of course, it also needs to provide results. So I would assume that we will be tested very early on in a Biden presidency about our willingness and our capacity and capability to engage into that. But not only in the political circles, we have ourselves developed this cooperation with Columbia University. And my impression was that they wanted to set an example on how Americans and Europeans are working together. They invested an incredible amount of time. So I believe we have a very much increased goodwill under Biden presidency over the next 4 years. It's not just going back to where we were before. So we have to increase also our ESPAS community, and I believe that that this conference is a very good start. Some were saying, I think Jim said, COVID is not just a problem, COVID is also an opportunity, and I think we are seeing it with this conference. I mean, bringing together, if my figures are right, nearly 1,000 people for such a conference. We didn't have that before without that digital format. And also to involve our Orbis community, or those who have been contributing think pieces in the past, who are basically working on the same issues globally, bringing them together in this network through this conference is fantastic. And I believe for the United States, that's also something which we should maybe engage in more, bringing more thinkers and people responsible in society, not just politics, into this process.
Jim, I'd like to come to you last, if I may, for a reason, because I'd like to ask Stefano to respond to what Klaus was saying about how ESPAS could build up its contacts with third world countries. To begin with the EUISS, we had quite a number. That was the first report we did in 2012. Then came the Great Recession and the aftermath of all of that. So in the last 5-6 years, we've hardly had any outreach to the outside world, which was a point that Jim was making. It's true. But Stefano, to you, in terms of cooperation there within the External Action Service, is there a capacity that we could develop with China or with other parts? Brazil, particularly. I went to Brazil once on a joint mission with Matt Barrows for 2 days on long-term trends. They were so surprised to get an American and a European arriving at the same time and talking about the same kind of things, but there may be quite a lot that one could do very practically, not very expensively, but we could actually have a global debate in the end on these serious issues. Stefano, please.
Thank you, James. Yes, I think that certainly there are opportunities and possibility of reaching out to a number of counterparts to discuss this. And I think that the broader is the basis on that we are getting together in order to have a common foresight, a common view about the future, and forging this common view about the future, the better it is. There are institutions. We have also the network of the policy planners. They could be also a very useful network to put at service of this exercise. And by the way, now speaking about our own policy planning, they have been instrumental in developing and in pioneering, I would say, the idea of strategic autonomy. So it's this is a network that it's very useful to mobilize in order to get much broader. And I mean, I was listening to Klaus before what he was saying about think tanks, about academia. That was referring to the United States, but this is also applicable to other countries. And again, we need to understand, I mean, foresight being based on assumptions, more assumptions you may gather, and more points of view and more elements. Hopefully, more precise it could become to give us an indication of what to do in the future.
Well, that's very interesting, very helpful, Stefano. Yesterday, I was asked how did I come about having the idea to found ESPAS, and I said it was because Matt Barrows, who was head of the NIC report going to the president, you know, you're looking 15 years ahead, and you've submitted to the incoming president. And then he said, why don't we do something together? So I said, well, there's nothing on the EU side. That's where these two budget lines came from, because we had to create something to work with the United States. But we did an operation. We did it with Robert Cooper and one or two others. We had a report, Global Trends 2025, at a critical juncture. That was a joint US-EU report. There was hardly any difference on both sides. And we said we'll do it again. But guess what? 10 years on, we still haven't done another exercise. But as they're about to produce 2035 to the incoming president, maybe that's a joint exercise which we could think about in the months ahead. No obligation, but it might be rather interesting to see how a transatlantic approach to this long-term trend would be useful. So thank you, Stefano, for your comment. Jim, to come to you, if I might, because as always, you like to have a little bit of disruption and variety. And what was your other word? I suppose excitement, really. This might not have been a conference where there was great excitement, but there was great kind of profundity, I think, in looking at the ideas. In looking towards another conference next year, what would you think we could be disruptive about? Do you have anything in mind?
Thank you, James. Oh, I could have many things in mind, but I have plenty of ideas of how to be disruptive. Let me quickly make 2 or 3 points. Well, I start with one point, which transatlantic. Okay, we heard a lot of very nice things today, and I'm really heartened by it. I also believe we have an opportunity as far as the new administration is concerned. At the same time, there are also some questions we have to be asking. When I think about strategic autonomy, for me, it means doing something which the Americans have often asked us to do. Get your bloody act together. The problem is that we have trouble doing it, but the Americans, when we do it, have trouble accepting it. That's something I want to talk about. For instance, I mentioned this in the talk with Madeleine Albright, on the digital thing. We have huge issues there. And we should look at them. Nord Stream, I mentioned it on purpose because it's a very complicated issue. You can have whatever analysis you have of Nord Stream, and I think there are divergent ones, and I respect them all. What we cannot have is an American administration imposing sanctions on Germany or on enterprises dealing with it. That is just not acceptable, and I think Mr. McAllister said. So if I say disruption, if we are real partners, we have to talk openly about those issues and not simply talk about nice sentiments. A second example I could give you, this is more for us again. I personally think that when I mentioned the potential of the European Union, one of the big things is regulatory power. It's what some people call the Brussels effect. Great. I fully share it. But there always is a but. This regulatory power, one, will not work and not be efficient if behind there's no industry. So I tend from time to time to say a bit provocatively that on the digital and data, we have the protection, the Chinese and the Americans have the data. So in other words, I want the issues to be more sort of a bit controversial, and we should invite people who are against the mantra of the Brussels bubble. That would be great, because we are missing this a bit. But I include myself, of course, in the bubble. Last remark, Maroš, what you said about cost of non-Europe. Yes, this is something we should go deeper into it. It is, of course, not an entirely new idea, because I'm sufficiently old to still remember the Cecchini report about the single market in the 80s. I also know that Klaus and the EPRS have done a lot of work on this, have even a unit about the cost of non-Europe. I very much think we should push this further. It's a very interesting thing. On Maroš still, I think it's very interesting what Maroš tries to do using foresight within the Commission, and I'm all for it. I think it's the right approach. But we should also look, and we will look, as far as the Council is concerned, and the same for the Parliament. The only thing where I always would simply insist on is that for me, the ESPAS, the real foresight, the long-term effect, is not an annual thing. It's a longer-term prospect. And on this basis, I think Maroš will get input, new ideas, and we all do, which we can then use in our policy making. And I think if we do that, then we'll really bring an added value. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Well, listen, we have 5 minutes to go, and I have therefore 2 people to ask for their final comments, which firstly Klaus, and then I'll give Maroš the final word. Klaus, to you, you might want to say something about the cost of not doing things, because you've been right at the forefront of that exercise for many years. But you also might like to talk a little about the outreach of to academia, because you have this experience which Anthony is helping broadly within ESPAS at Columbia University. Is this a kind of pilot project of how ESPAS can reach out to the think tanks and others? Because this seems to be a great source of enthusiasm, also part of a much broader network. Klaus, please.
Yeah, I believe that today we are giving a very good example, because suddenly we can scale what we are doing. We are not limited to 100, 150 people in a room, but we go to 1,000. That's a multiple of what we normally were able to do. And we know we have all these contributors, people who are interested in future trends, who contribute to Orbis. And I think that's an untapped potential which we can multiply and use for a much better advantage. On the cost of non-Europe, I agree with Jim. The beauty of the cost of non-Europe is that if there's really such a thing as a cost of non-Europe, and that can be proven and you can put a figure on it, and normally those figures are in the billions, then that's creating consensus. Because if there's a huge cost of non-Europe which is untapped and which you could tap into, then it's no longer a question whether you're enthusiastic about the European Union or maybe more skeptical, but that's simply a resource which we can all agree that this should be exploited. So I see the cost of non-Europe as a big tool for consensus building in a union where, of course, as Jim has put it earlier, sometimes there are not only 25 different opinions, but much more. And that was my experience also with groups coming in from countries and maybe with a more skeptical background. If you can argue your case in a pragmatic way, and we try to do something similar with the risk and capabilities approach, if we can show that this is really a generalized risk, very likely to happen, and that we don't have the capabilities, you are quite far to creating a consensus that you need to do something about it.
Right. Thank you so much, Klaus. That's perfect. And Maroš, over to you for the last word, if we may, so as to round off our tremendous kind of 36 hours brainstorming on this interinstitutional basis. Maroš.
No, thank you very much, Jason, James, and of course, I can assure you that when Ursula asked the question about the cost of Europe, that the European Parliament publication on it was actually the first course. We've been looking up for it, and I was very, very obliged to Klaus that he gave me, the study, and I agree with you that, and also with Jim, that it should be a kind of ongoing project. And I think maybe that would be kind of inspiration for us, how we can work on that project further. I mean, probably it would be too revolutionary idea, but that I'm also responsible for better regulation, for making sure that we've done a proper impact assessment, and how it is structured, the cost, recurrent cost, compliance cost, and so on and so forth. So, to at least on this, I would say the big flagship initiatives, especially when we expect the discussion might be difficult on them, I think it would be good maybe to have also this partial assessment. What would be the cost of non-acting in this field? I think we have seen that how big costs we are paying for the fact that we didn't build a health union a couple of years earlier, that how dramatic situations we've been faced with when we realized that we somehow do not have the diversified sources of protective health material or the basic medicines, which I'm sure most of the Europeans didn't know that they are not manufactured anymore in Europe. So these are, I would say, very particular examples. But I think that to kind of work on this and on a regular basis, I think that would be extremely, extremely useful. And we already know how to do it. I think that Klaus and his team developed a very good methodology for it. So I think we just should really use it for the future. Second thing I would like to underscore is the Jim point that this shouldn't be once a year discussion if it comes to the foresight. I think that we should use this annual strategic foresight as some kind of scene setter, I would say topic of the year, topic of the agenda, which is important for our work, but that it should be really like an ongoing activity where we are able to learn from each other and to feed in the most relevant foresight conclusions in our work to operationalize it, as I would say also Stefano and Jim very well described it. Just to show also to other policymakers and decision makers that the foresight is actually very useful, very practical things to have that look over the horizon to work on these different scenarios, select the best one, and to do this, backcasting, what it means for our today's action. I think it's very important, and therefore I think that we should really build on that momentum which was created by all this, I would say, excellent foresight community of ESPAS, but really now I see expanding and outreaching to our member states and international partners. And the last point I would mention, I think what is very important is this academia outreach, because academic soil, if I can use that word, also give you more freedom, more liberty, more possibilities for disruptions, contradictions, and having, I would say, more thought-provoking debates, as Jim was calling for. And I think to really have this academic network, which would work for us in Europe or the Atlantic, or I would say also in Eastern and Asian countries, for really cross-fertilize our ideas. I think it's an excellent idea, and I think we just probably should have our next ESPAS meeting on how can we actually trickle down, I would say, this idea, these contributions which we heard over the last 2 days into the practical arrangement, so we can actually benefit from all that good thought which was put into the different intervention of the last 2 days. So my really last word would be, again, the expression of gratitude to you, James, to Klaus, to Anthony, to the whole team, because really it was a great work. I believe very rewarding, very important, and I think it definitely is pushing us forward and further in building this top of the class, I believe, excellent European foresight.
Well, thank you very much indeed. This is now the end of the day, because I've now been given a red flag and saying we're about 1 minute over. But Maroš, to you, thank you very much indeed. Stefano, thank you very much indeed. Jim, thank you very much indeed. And last but not least, Klaus, thank you very much, all of you, for a superb kind of conversation to give us the drive forward in the months ahead. And we look forward to being there collectively and work on these issues together.